How is everybody? I need to fill this room up a little bit. Hopefully we can fill all the seats. It's really good to be with you. This is really a treat for me. As I was driving up to campus this morning, I had some reflections like I was coming home. I haven't been on campus for a long time. I'm an Aggie. I'm an Aggie that graduated 15 years ago, but I've spent more time at a school down south that also has blue colors as part of their logo. So you have some BYU students, yeah. But this is fun for me to be back in a different way than I was 15 years ago. So it's a little bit of a homecoming for me, and I appreciate the chance to spend some time with you. So let me get to know the audience just a little bit. So I know there's some different schools here. So Utah State, if you're from Utah State, raise your hand. Woo! Look at those Aggies. You guys drove a long ways. What a sacrifice to be here. All right, BYU Provo. Woo! Okay, we got one team. BYU Idaho. I met some students in the front. Good. All right. Weber State. Woo! UVU. Right there, one. He's representing. Give it a hand for him, actually. All right, Westminster, Salt Lake Community College, Cedar City something, St. George something else. No, nothing? Okay. Anybody here not in college? Any high schoolers? We had some high school students join us last year for the leadership forum. No high schoolers, okay. Raise your hand from whatever school you're in if you're in a sales major or focused program. How many of you are in a dedicated sales program of study? Okay. And if you're in, since I'm a CFO, a finance program of study, raise your hand. There you go. Those people need to stand. No, I'm just kidding. 3 finance people. Marketing. Ooh, okay. Marketing and sales go together a little bit. HR. Some HR people, okay. What other corporate functions are we leaving out? Operations. They always get left for last, right? Supply chain and operations. We'll just bucket them together. Right here on the front. Okay. Anybody not represented? Nobody's going to say if they weren't, right? Okay. So we've got a good diversity of majors. I was hoping that was the case because sales, I think, is the profession. It's a noble profession, but it's the profession that requires a multidisciplinary approach across all business disciplines. And so regardless of your major of study, the fact that you're spending a little bit of time focused on sales is a really good thing. Sales is where it all comes together, right? You need to be good at finance, good at marketing, good at HR, good at supply chain and operations. You at least need to be effective across all those disciplines to be a good salesperson. And so that's why I'm passionate about sales in part, and it's good that you're getting some breadth. So Ben Kaufmann, I'm from MarketStar. Raise your hand if you feel like you know MarketStar well. Raise your hands. Ooh, not very well. Okay, so let me just give you the 30-second pitch on MarketStar. This won't be a commercial about MarketStar, but this is a privilege for us to come and support this sales competition every year. We're a partner with Pinterest, and together we've sponsored this sales competition for a number of years. And this is representative of kind of the body of talent that we, MarketStar, want to come work for us. So that's our shameless pitch for, we hire on average 600 to 700 people a year. Most of them, 95% of them, sales roles. We're a company headquartered in Ogden. We've been in business for 30 years. We have offices in Salt Lake, an office in Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake, and then 12 offices around the world. We have operations in 12 countries around the world. Think of us as a 1,500 person organization producing about $120 million in revenue per year. And MarketStar has had a really exciting year this year. MarketStar, even though we've been in business for 30 years and we are a local Utah company, we were founded in Utah, we pressed the reset button in February, and we're so excited about that. For the last 15 years, MarketStar was owned as a subsidiary of a company called Omnicom, an East Coast-based financial holding company. And we partnered with some local capital this year to buy ourselves out from that corporate parent, and now we're an independent Utah-owned company with some capacity to grow and do some fun things. So we just bought a company over in Ireland, about 150 people now call MarketStar home over in Dublin, Ireland, and we'll continue to expand our footprint across the world. So MarketStar has been for 30 years, product-centric, people-powered, outsourced sales business for large tech brands. So think of us as, there's not a Fortune 100 company that thinks about outsourcing sales that doesn't think about and typically talk to MarketStar about doing sales on their behalf. And we have a long track record with some clients that you would know well, Intel, HP, Cisco, Oracle, those kinds of companies have been with MarketStar for a long time. Our longest tenured client is Intel. It's been with MarketStar for 26 years, so they've found some value in what we do. But MarketStar is a company like the sales industry that's in transformation. We have a point of view that the sales industry is one of the last holdouts from the pre-industrial era as a function. Sales still today is maybe the only corporate function that hasn't been modernized, to say it differently. It's still largely people-powered, and the sale of products, at least business-to-business sales, and that's what we specialize in at MarketStar. Business-to-business sales is predicated on people talking to people and building relationships, which is how sales has been done for a long time. But it's not how sales is going to be done in the next generation. You know, sales is the corporate function, in my opinion, that's primed for disruption. And we see in the next decade sales becoming not product-centric, but more customer-centric. We've already seen that trend in sales. And not people-powered, as much people-powered, but technology and AI-powered specifically. And so MarketStar is a company that's investing in the leading edge of innovation in the B2B sales industry with the intent to convert our business from that product-centric, people-powered business of building relationships to a focus on customer centricity powered by AI and technology that allows the cost of a business-to-business transaction to be reduced by an order of magnitude. You think about what Amazon has done to retail sales. The transformation won't be along the same lines. It's not as simple as a website and a distribution network. But the same order of magnitude that we've seen in the disruption of retail sales will happen in B2B sales, and MarketStar is going to be a leading player in that transformation. So I'm done with my commercial. That's MarketStar in a nutshell. We would love to talk to you about what we're doing. This is a company that's going to be the next Utah unicorn. That's our commitment to our employees and any prospective employees that want to come chat with us about how we're going to go do that. So that's MarketStar. You may be asking yourself, why are we hearing from a CFO today? If you were here last year, raise your hand if you were here last year. So a few of you. So you heard from Paul Grant, our Chief Revenue Officer, which is a little more germane to sales, right? If you go into a sales profession in any company, you'll typically roll up to the Chief Revenue Officer, not the Chief Financial Officer. So I'm here because I'm an Aggie, but more so because I love sales. Even though I've spent my career, and I have a pretty young career still, I've spent my career in and around sales. I spent 5 years in venture capital private equity, building companies to get their products ready to sell into the marketplace. I spent almost 10 years at a combination of HP and then Hewlett Packard Enterprise, largely supporting sales from an M&A standpoint, from a disintegration standpoint, from a sales finance support standpoint, pricing, operations. And I have a really high opinion of sales. If you look at Fortune 100 leaders, if you look at C-suite leaders across the Fortune 100, 47% of them started their career in sales. And that's because sales is where we breed leaders. It's the best place to breed leadership. So I'm here because there's a fascinating intersection for me between leadership and sales, and that's why I've dedicated my career to the function of sales from the standpoint of finance. So finance can do a lot to enable sales to be effective and productive, and that's a little bit of where I've made my brand in the industry. So you see some brands up here. You see a really good university and a not so good university. You guys can define which one is great and which one is not so great, and some other places where I've been. You see MarketStar's logo in orange up there, but I'm closer to you, your seat, in terms of chronology than somebody who typically holds a CFO title. I'm still very much on the front end of my career. 15 years ago, I was sitting where you're at. And so this is not an opportunity for me to tell you how to be successful, or for you to think, well, how can I be as successful as him? I'm still getting started. And so I think of myself very much as a part of your generation. And so rather than tell you things that I think I know, I'm going to tell you things that I've observed. So if I have one superpower, if I can claim one superpower, it's the superpower of observation, which is not a very popular superpower. But I've had the privilege of being in a lot of interesting seats in 15 years and watching some really dynamic leaders lead organizations, and I've been able to curate lessons of observation from being in the room with some really incredible people. And I feel like I've distilled some of what I've observed into some principles that guide my daily leadership style and how I think about organizations and leading businesses. So I've curated some of them for you today. We'll kind of go through them. If I see you guys falling asleep, then we'll shut off the PowerPoint presentation, and I'll ask you guys to share with me your leadership principles. But I've intended it to be impactful and fun. There's about a dozen points that we can run through quickly, and I've titled them some early observations. They're early observations because I'm still early in my career. They're early observations for you because most of you, it appears, are starting, right? You have an aspiration for maybe what you're good at and what you want to do, and this sales competition is part of building experiences and relationships to help you get to where you want to go. So, without further ado, let me tell you about how I started my career journey. So this is my family. On the right-hand side is our third child. His name's Logan, appropriately named because we lived in Logan, my wife and I, and kept that namesake. But he's in preschool. And when I was in preschool some number of years ago, we had, as our preschool graduation, we had a career fair, and we were supposed to dress up as what we wanted to be when we grew up. And so we created cardboard cutouts, and we had this little line that our teacher helped us write, and then we memorized, and then we were to get up on stage and say our little line and then get our diploma and step off. And I was convinced that I wanted to be a dad. And my preschool teacher couldn't get it through my head that that wasn't a profession, that there was like a difference between being a dad and having a job. And I was unrelenting. I said, no, all I want to be when I grow up is a dad. All my friends were firefighters, pilots, policemen, athletes, whatnot, whatever you would choose as a preschooler. And I just wanted to be a dad. That's just what I knew I wanted to be. So I got a little brown suit and a tie, and I held up my face, and I said some line about, I'm going to go to work so I can provide for my kids because I'm going to be a dad. But it's my first recollection ever of contemplating that there was something other than childhood. And as I grew up, I remember a scenario in particular. When I was 9 years old, we lived next to a golf course, and on Saturday mornings I would go out into the woods behind the golf course and I would pick up golf balls. How many people have done that as a side gig as a kid? A few of you, right? And you know about how profitable that profession is, right? Part of the reason why I'm a CFO is because I did a really crappy job as a 9-year-old at managing my side gig collecting golf balls. But I'd spend hours in the woods on a Saturday morning collecting golf balls. I'd shine them up and I'd take them to the clubhouse and I'd sell them back to the golf pro for a penny a ball or 2 pennies a ball or something. And it was really slave labor. But I was making some money and I felt really good about myself. But I remember as a 9-year-old walking home after making like $1.57 for 3 hours of work and thinking, and this is the first time I ever had a mature thought about adulthood, I think, which was, just spent all morning to make $1.57. How am I ever going to make it in this world? I'm pretty sure that lunch costs more than $1.57, and I just spent my whole morning earning $1.57. And I just, as a young kid, and you guys can all identify with this because we've all been there, as a young kid, I was quite insecure about my own future. I didn't know how I was going to develop some kind of expertise that I could turn into a source of income to build the kind of life I wanted to live. And as I grew older, I started to understand the world a little bit better, but that insecurity stayed with me through high school, through undergrad, and through grad school. And if I'm honest, I think some of that insecurity still stays with me today. The insecurity about my success in the future. But it really hit a point for me when I was in college. When I was in your seat, before I had my first job, when I had all these ideas and all these expectations, but I just hadn't really gathered experiences that would make me very marketable. And so my first piece of advice for you today is to be confident in your future. If I could take myself 15 or 16 or 17 years ago when I was an undergrad and tell myself one thing, it would be confident about the future. You have a bright future, and success is more inevitable than you think. And I know that sounds a little Pollyannish because everybody has a different career path, but seriously, you guys are here because you're the best of the best, right? You guys represent different schools, but you're here in an extracurricular academic environment with some of the best of the best. And if you continue on the course that led you here, success is almost inevitable. But just be confident in that. It's interesting that in the early part of our careers, we have the least amount of confidence, but the most amount of opportunity in what's ahead. And so, I don't know if it strikes a chord with anybody if you're feeling a little insecure about the future, but you're competing against people that you have a leg up on or two legs up on already. So be confident in your future. Second is, I would challenge you to apply an investor mindset to the choices that are coming. How many people have a full-time job after graduation already? One? Okay. How many people have an internship lined up for next summer already? A few. How many people have no idea what they're going to be doing next summer or after graduation? Most people, right? All right. So this is apropos, right? We all have a lot of decisions to make in the next number of weeks, months, and years. And it's interesting when I talk to students and as I reflect on my own experience, the approach to making those decisions about how you curate where you're going to spend your time, what experiences you're going to have, who you're going to work for, doesn't receive as much intellectual rigor as some other things that we might compare it to. If you think about your career as the most valuable economic asset that you have, who has over $1 million in the bank? Anybody? Even if you did, I would challenge you that your career is far more valuable than $1 million in the bank. But just do the thought experiment with me. If you had 7 figures in the bank and you were responsible for investing 7 figures in a company or an entity or an asset, think about the level of due diligence that you would do on making that investment. It would be quite significant, I would propose. And yet, when we invest an asset of much greater value, our careers, sometimes we're less apt to do as much due diligence. We follow a friend, or we take the first opportunity that comes along, or we sell ourselves a little bit short of what we could have made the opportunity into. So I just challenge yourself to think of your career as an economic asset that you're investing, and you should expect a return from that investment, and you should approach the due diligence phase with a lot of rigor. One of the things that I love to do when I'm with students, and I used to hire a lot from BYU, I'd get a student in the room and I'd totally change the power dynamic on them. You guys have all, who's been in an interview recently for a job or an internship? Lots of people. And typically the power dynamic is, stop me if I'm wrong, but typically the power dynamic is the interviewer has all the power, right? You dressed up for him, you brushed your teeth for him, you pressed your clothes for him, you have answers ready for questions that he or she may ask, you printed your resume, you were on time, maybe you were early, you did some research about the company, and the interviewer has all the power, right? Because they're making a decision about a job. But the real power dynamic in that relationship, the person who has the greater economic asset, the person who's making a call on directing the power in the room is actually you, right? When you're sitting in there for an interview, you're the one that's making an investment decision in whatever this person is offering as an opportunity. And I want you to think about that. I used to take students and I'd rearrange the furniture in the room so that we were face to face instead of across the table. And then they'd get in the room and I'd say, I'm not here to ask you dumb HR questions. I already know you're smart enough for this job. I want you to ask me questions that are reflective of your commitment to invest your career in us and sort of turn the tables on the interview. And it's interesting to watch somebody when they sort of catch the vision of, oh, that's right, the power dynamic is at least equal and maybe I have more power in the room. People totally change. And it's fun to see sort of the light come on and say, oh yeah, I can do as much interrogation in this setting as you can. In fact, maybe more so. You can't be arrogant about it, of course. There's a mutual exchange of value in an interview. But just as a tactical tip, think about interviews differently and think about what you bring to the interview rather than what you're trying to take away from it. Is that helpful? Yeah, I see some nodding heads. It's helped me in my past. I'm going to share a principle here that is apropos also in this stage of life, which is decisions chart success, execution secures it. What do I mean by that? What I mean is we tend to overemphasize the importance of a decision. Think of a decision you're making now or you recently made or you're making in the near future, and you want to get that decision right. This was always my complex when I was younger, is I thought that every decision had a right and a wrong. What do I wear today? What do I major in? What class load do I take this semester? What internship should I get? How should I structure my resume? And every one of those choices felt like a right or a wrong to me. And maybe you didn't have the same complex as me, but I'm here to tell you there really is no right or wrong in a lot of the decisions that we make today. Moral decisions, yes, I believe that there's a right or a wrong, but everyday typical decisions that we make in our careers and business are multitude shades of gray, and there's typically not a right or a wrong. We have the ability to make a choice, and that's important to make an informed decision, but success is determined not by whether you made the right choice or not, but what you do after you make that choice to make the choice that you made successful. Does that make sense? Is that too simple of a principle? I myself, I've caught myself and I've observed others wringing their hands around, maybe I majored in the wrong thing, or maybe I took the wrong class, or maybe that wasn't the right job to take right out of undergrad, or maybe I should go to grad school, but I don't know what the right thing is to do. I would just challenge you to make an informed decision, and once you've made an informed decision, forget about the point of decision. That's past. Your job now is to execute on the opportunity that decision unlocked for you. And if you'll do that, inevitably all of the decisions that you made will be the right decisions because you did the work to make them successful. So think of the decision as 1% and the execution after that decision is 99%. It applies equally to relationships, by the way. Just make a decision and then move forward and make it work. But you're not here for relationship advice. So here's my favorite linguistic trick, and I didn't know couldn't figure out a different way to represent this. So hoard multi-generational compounding. What in the heck do I mean by that? This is, I think, a key to how we approach life, and particularly in business. This is where you start to separate people that are able to lead organizations versus people that just lack the capacity for leadership, and that is to learn from and to build on the expertise of those who are around you, and specifically those that came before you. I have a picture of an octopus here, and I've told this story. MarketStar people that are in the room will have heard it before, but one of the things that makes the species of octopi unique is that they're really intelligent. Some people think that their intelligence is second only to humans and maybe in some ways equivalent to. But as a species, they haven't made very much progress. Would you say that's the case? They still live under rocks and eat slimy things in cold water. They haven't made much progress in part because, unlike humans, they do not have a mechanism to pass on multi-generational learning. The mother octopus, anybody know this about how octopi live? No? So the mother octopus lays tens of thousands of eggs and then guards those eggs with her life. In fact, she loses her life in guarding her offspring because she doesn't eat during the 6 or 7 months it takes those eggs to incubate, and then she dies shortly after they hatch. And so every octopus that's ever born into the world starts from zero, and they have to teach themselves about their surroundings and the skills they need to survive. The art of the human experiment, on the other hand, is we just happen to be really good at multi-generational compound learning, right? Every generation is smarter than the last because we take the learnings of the succeeding generation and we build on them. And I would just say, from a macro standpoint, if you distill that down into your own life, you sort of have a choice, right? Are you going to be like the octopus that starts from zero and learns everything on your own? Or do you have mechanisms, experiences, people built into your life to allow you to build on the knowledge of others? The fact that you're in a university, in a sales program, means that you're doing some of that. And it's a good start. But that journey continues long after you leave a formal education environment. And the principle of being humble enough to accept the expertise of others and then build on it is something that really starts to define, in my opinion, the really great leaders from those that want to do everything by themselves. This is a related principle. Mentorship is multi-generational learning in action. Who has a mentor here? Raise your hand. Ooh, a lot of people. Except the BYU people. No, I'm just kidding. Who is a mentor in the room? Who's currently mentoring somebody else? Okay. I expected that ratio. Maybe 5 times as many mentees in the room as mentors. And I would suggest that there are lessons about leadership that you can't learn unless you spend equal time on both sides of that equation. In fact, the laws of nature would suggest that you can't actually be an effective mentee unless you're willing to be a mentor to somebody else, right? You have to put something out into the world to get something back. And so for all of you that raised your hands that you're a mentee, but didn't raise your hand that you're not yet a mentor, I would just challenge you. You're an expert in something. You might not feel like you are. You might not feel like you're an expert in what you want to be, but you know something that somebody else needs to know. And I'd challenge you to think of yourself as a mentor and find ways to mentor people around you. Not only for the title, but especially for the experience. Because when you start investing in others and helping them come to an understanding of some things you know, there's a different dynamic that your own ability to learn from others takes on. And so I challenge you to do that, to be both a mentor and a mentee at all times. I challenge you to master the art of learning, meaning if you don't learn anything else in university, learn how to learn, right? University is not about what you know coming out necessarily. There are some things that you should know. But people get hired and fired based on their ability, on their aptitude to learn. And it sounds funny, but learning to learn is a skill. And if you come out of your university experience not knowing how to learn and how specifically you learn best, then you've wasted a great opportunity. And employers will be looking for your approach to learning and challenging you to show that aptitude throughout your career. This principle is closely related. Live the 70-20-10 principle. Who's heard this principle before? Sound familiar? BYU Idaho. Look at that showing up in the front row. All right. This is a principle that was pioneered in the 1980s by a guy by the name of Matt Madsen, Ivy League trained behavioral scientist, who put the theory out. It's been debated a lot, but rings true to many of us, that development in general, along any lines, grows out of an interplay of experiential learning, social learning, and formal learning. What do I mean by that? 70% of development comes from your experiences. And this sales competition is a great example of an experience, an application of what you're learning that really imprints on you skills and aptitudes and perspectives that will be valuable. 70% of development is about experience. 20% is about feedback. That's the social aspect of learning. People who can observe you performing and give you feedback so you can improve. It's really critical that you surround yourself with people that are willing to give you feedback. And 10% of development is about formal learning, which is kind of what we're doing here in me delivering to you some points, but often what we do in a classroom setting, right? Formal learning is critical, but it's only 10%. The mistake that most of us make isn't that we don't dabble in these areas, it's that we allocate resources inversely. So 70% of our resources go into formal learning and 10% into experience. And I just challenge you to think about resource allocation, the allocation of your time, especially in this phase of your life, to match kind of this phasing of experiential development. 70%, 20%, 10%. Employ the reflexive principle. I'm going to come back to what I started with, which is in a new role, in a new job, in a new environment, we all feel insecure. And the emotional defense mechanism when we feel insecure, oftentimes, is that we become cynical or we become critical. Because if you're in an environment that's making you feel a little uncomfortable and you're wondering whether you measure up, if you can make fun of how somebody else is doing it, or if you can be cynical about the fact that the dots don't all connect for you right now, then you've effectively put up a defensive barrier against your own insecurity. The problem with that is this principle, which is that which you choose to focus on with your mental and emotional energy actually becomes you. And so if you jump into a corporate environment, and I see this all the time with young grads who come into a business environment and are totally overwhelmed, the first thing they do is become cynical, and they start to observe the bad behaviors of people around them to justify their own insecurity, and then they become the combination of all the worst attributes of the people that sit around them. So beware of this reflexive principle. It also happens in the opposite spectrum, which is if you're emotionally intelligent enough to accept your own insecurity and be intellectually curious and gracious and focus on the qualities of those around you that you want to emulate, you'll become like the best parts of the people around you. But it's your decision. It's where early career, postgraduate students get into a lot of trouble not understanding that principle. I'm going to try to go quickly because I just got the 5-minute sign. The time value of money. Who knows that principle? If you've taken a finance class, you know it, right? It's a beautiful principle. I'm going to propose that the time value of moments is almost as critical and maybe more so, meaning moments like money are only really valuable in the present. And sometimes if you're valuing money, you discount the value of $1 tomorrow back to today. It's not as worth as much today because of uncertainty that you're going to collect that dollar, right? But moments are sort of the same way, except we sort of apply the discounting equation in reverse. As we seem to put a premium on things that are in the future instead of discounting them. And so I just challenge you to think about, this is what really matters, is what you're doing today. Don't put too much of a premium on things that are too far out in the future because they may or may not materialize. Capture the opportunities that are in front of you today. Motivation before aptitude. Let me describe what I'm saying here. When I was sitting in my high school career Services office, going through the survey that told me what jobs I had a high aptitude to be successful in. And then I had to choose 3 to talk to my career counselor about so that I could choose a college major so that I could be successful in life. I had a conniption fit because I didn't really understand how these aptitudes would translate into my future. I got almost 10 years into my career before I realized that putting aptitudes as the test on what you do is the wrong approach. And let me explain. Motivation is more persistent than aptitude, meaning what motivates each of us is very different. And I think it's a special thing about every one of us. You need to discover what motivates you. And then when you do, you can follow those motivations to discover aptitudes that you have or can create that will allow you to contribute in a way that continues to be at the center of the core of your motivation. I think people sometimes try to describe this principle by saying, follow your heart, do what you love. I would say that's not good advice because a lot of the times that leads to disaster. But I would say think very introspectively about what motivates you. Find areas that allow you to stay in that center of your motivation and build aptitudes around that, and you will be more successful. For me, my personal journey was I was in a few roles where I had no decision-making ability in my job at all. The only decisions I made every day were when I showed up for work, what I ate for lunch, and what time I went home. Those are the only decisions I made all day. And I was facilitating other people making decisions. And I was very dissatisfied in my role until I realized that for me, and this is unique, but for me, decisions make the difference. When I at the end of the day when I'm driving home, if I've made a decision, even if it's a simple decision, I'm satisfied, and that's what I reflect on my drive home. For you, it may be something different. It may be impact, it may be personal connection, it may be praise, it may be money, it may be a lot of things, but finding your source of motivation is more critical than finding what you're good at, especially early on. This is a little meaty, but I'm going to take the time because I think it's important. So, anybody recognize this equation? No. Nobody. Okay. So, you don't have to take any other finance classes if you understand this equation. So let me teach it to you really quickly. This is my geek finance moment, but it has a personal career building application. Enterprise value, EV, is the value that you should be willing to pay for something. In most cases in finance, it's the value of a company, enterprise value. Enterprise value equals the present value of all the future free cash flows that asset will produce. You guys, that's the time value of money concept, right? So the present value of all future free cash flows represents the value of an asset. It's equivalent to enterprise value. It's mathematically equivalent. That also equals, now think of a company, still in the context of a company, the market value of equity, meaning the number of shares times the price of the share at any given time, which goes up and down, right? Plus the debt minus the cash. Most people think when I say that, oh, you got it wrong. You're supposed to add the cash and minus the debt. But that's not the case. You add the net debt, which is debt minus cash. Debt represents assets. When you borrowed money, you did something with it and you produced an asset. Cash can pay off that asset. So it's market value of equity plus net debt. I see some eyes rolling because they were not all finance majors, but I promise you that's the secret finance formula. The world works around this formula, and so does your career, and let me explain. The present value of your free cash flows is your current value. Your current value is what you can charge in an interview room for your first job. It's the salary you demand. As you go throughout your career, it's the premiums that you can charge as you advance. Your current value is related to all the future value that you're going to produce for a given company or entity. And that equals the perception of the impact that you can create for that organization multiplied by the probability that you're going to do that. You could potentially have a big impact, but a low probability of creating that impact, and that doesn't equal a lot of value. Plus your assets. You're all obtaining a university degree. That's an asset. How many undergraduates here intend to go to business school at some point? Some, okay. That's another asset, right? You trade up salaries typically from a starting undergrad salary to a starting graduate salary because you added an asset. That's a graduate degree, right? And cash is equivalent to areas for development or known deficiencies in your repertoire of skills. And I would just challenge you to think about your value this way. Is the perception of the impact that I can create limiting me? Or is it the probability that I can get that done? Do I have the right assets to contribute to what I want to contribute to, and what are my areas of deficiency? And I promise you, if you kind of map that out in those buckets, you'll be successful at managing the perception of your value. How are we doing on time, Tanya? We're done. Okay, this is my last one, which is why we're done. My last point is develop a personal leadership model. This happens to be mine. We'll save it for another conversation. We can talk about it after the break. But the CEO of PepsiCo challenged me personally 10 years ago to develop a personal leadership model. At the time, I had no idea what he was talking about. But what he said to me at the time was, my career success depends almost entirely on my personal leadership model. Because I'm the only person that can hold myself, this is him talking to me, accountable for my execution against that model. And if you allow yourself to launch a career, and especially if you have aspirations to be a leader, and you allow others' definitions of leadership to define you, and others who don't understand who you are as well as you do to keep you accountable to their version of leadership, you will become frustrated and stymied in your progress. So this is not an overnight project. You're not going to go back to your dorm rooms tonight and create your personal leadership model. For me, it's been a development over the last decade since I was challenged to do it, but it sits right at the center of how I operate on a day-to-day basis, and it's what, at the end of the day, regardless of my title or my position or my income or our business success, I know whether I measure up or not. And at the end of the day, that's the most important barometer for me of my success. So that's all I had prepared. If we have time for Q&A, I'd love to take some questions, but I'll let Tanya be the boss on how we're doing on time.
Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes to do a Q&A. So just raise your hand and I can bring the mic to you.
I knew it would be a BYU Idaho student first.
Okay, so my name is Spencer Hall. I'm a marketing professional sales major at BYUI. I love the leadership model and the personal leadership model and how that has been a developing and ongoing thing. I noticed the trust through assurance part. I don't know if it was trust through assurance or trust. Could you elaborate a little more on that part? I noticed it's there twice.
Yeah, a little bit. So in my elevator pitch for my personal leadership model is this, that there are 3 successive questions that every person organization progresses through in their development process. The first of which is, are you excellent at what you do? And is there a common shared definition of excellence inside of that team? That seems like soup and potatoes, but you'd be surprised how many organizations that's not the case inside of. And then and only then, when you've solved some shared definition of excellence, can you progress into interpersonal relationships on a team where you're building trust. Without a common definition of excellence, it's difficult to ever build real and meaningful trust. In order to build trust, you have to be equally vulnerable with each other, and you have to create interdependence inside of a team, and that's underwritten by excellence. Once there's some element of trust built, you can start to make choices that are abundant in nature as opposed to scarce in nature. Most people view the world as a scarce place, meaning I get mine and you get yours, but if I get more, you get less, and if you get more, I get less. But really great leaders don't think about the world that way. They think about how we can both get more, and they maximize outcomes because they're willing to be abundant with the way they perceive the world and the way they interact with others. But you can only do that if you have a shared definition of excellence, if you've paid the price to build trust, and you have the commitment to operate abundantly. So that's my leadership model.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is London Weiler. I'm a marketing student at BYU. I was curious, you said if we could learn one thing in college, it would be learn how to learn.
Yeah.
How do you recommend we do that efficiently?
Yeah. So everybody has a little bit different way of learning. Keith Titus, who's our CEO, is not here, so I'll pick on him, and he'll watch this afterwards, and he'll smile. But he and I have very different learning styles. For him to read anything and internalize it, he has to be listening to classical music. That's interesting. That doesn't apply to me. It may not apply to you. But Keith is somebody that I respect who's really refined what it takes for him to learn. And it's unique to him. It doesn't apply to anybody else. But he spent the introspective time thinking, that didn't really work. I wasn't able to recall that information. I read it, but I wasn't able to recall it. For me, my personal learning is centered on writing, the physical process of writing. I never go back and read my notes, but when I write, I retain at least 3 times as much as I do when I just listen. And so for me, writing is an important part of learning. So everybody has their quirks about how their mind works, but you need to know yours, and you need to make sure that you can learn efficiently. I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for about one more question.
My name is Riley Searley. I'm a sales major at Weber State University. Obviously, in sales, there's a lot of conversating with people, meeting new people. What would be your advice on networking and building networks?
Yeah, networking and building networks. That's interesting to think about. I'll give you one principle that I think is really important: is value in the professional world is typically added at the boundaries of networks. So I'll give you an example. I was a graduate student at BYU. I got my MBA from BYU, got my undergrad from Utah State. 70 or 80% of the BYU MBA students were BYU undergrads, and they went to school together 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years previously, and they were operating inside their network of people that they were comfortable in, and as a result, they were able to add very little value than they naturally had to each other before they came to school. And so if you extrapolate that kind of academic co-location of the same group into industry, you'll find that people like to huddle together, right? You'll get into your profession or your company and you'll have a group of people that you think like, look like, you like the same food, you like to go do the same things, and you become comfortable in this insulated network of people. And you'll say, yeah, I've got a great network. I love these people. But the fact is, the more insular you get in a single network, the less value you're able to add to your organization, because organizations need people who can connect disparate groups of people. And so think of networking differently. Think of your network as, where can I connect the boundaries of 2 different networks and try to add value? And that's where your network doesn't have to be large. You just have to be intentional about how you use it. And networking can be a great tool to add value to you, your company, and your career, but you have to think about it at the boundary. That would be my suggestion. We didn't get any questions from Utah State students.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I don't know about you guys, but your presentation today was so wonderful. I took so many takeaways. So can you guys please put your hands together and give him a thank you?